A breakdown of Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth reveals several uses of propaganda to the educated observer. One of the first and most obvious tools being used is the second pillar of propaganda, the pillar of glittering generality, where you associate something with a virtue word or picture or phrase to make you accept something or prove it without examining the evidence more closely. It addresses the emotions, not the intellect. Al Gore goes as far to claim that this is a moral issue and not a political one.
And that is what is at stake. Our ability to live on planet Earth, to have a future as a civilization. I believe this is a moral issue.
The film repeatedly addresses the emotions, suggesting a use of Nazi propaganda in an attempt to repel intellectual thought. We see melting glaciers falling into the vast seas. We see storms sweeping through resort areas. We see deserts of drought-stricken lands. We even see a polar bear desperately swimming for its life, suggesting it will drown all because of man-made carbon-induced global warming. The use of second pillar virtue images goes hand in hand with Gore's use of sixth pillar propaganda card stacking as well. In fact, the whole documentary film is about the worst case scenario of Gore's thesis. He provides select facts, images, statements, and graphics to constantly highlight the imminent calamity that will befall us if we do not heed his warnings. A great example of this is the rising sea level graphics that Al Gore shows us, with Florida's coastline changing, as well as what would happen to San Francisco Bay. And he even plays on some emotions in showing a graphic representation of Manhattan flooding and identifying where the World Trade Center Memorial would be. Another tool we see employed by the film's creators is the use of pinpointing the enemy in terms of a propaganda tool, which we see a lot in war propaganda. Gore is very clear about who the enemy is.
Meet Mr. Sunbeam. He comes all the way from the sun to visit Earth.
Hello, Earth. Just popping in to brighten your day. La 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 la. And now I'll be on my way.
Not so fast, Sunbeam. We're greenhouse gases. You ain't going nowhere.
Oh! Ah! Oh! Ah! Oh! Oh, God, it hurts!
Pretty soon, Earth is chock full of sunbeams. They're rotting corpses heating our atmosphere.
The depiction of greenhouse gases as slimy little evil clouds would not be suspect, but notice the addition of them counting money. This is a clear subliminal connection being established between temperature rise, carbon emissions, and the evil oil companies which are causing it and are lying to you about it. This also feeds into an ongoing theme in the film that there's no middle ground on the debate, that either you believe and are virtuous trying to save the planet, or you are a part of the evil corporate oil companies trying to lie about this obvious data and destroy the planet for profit.
He worked for the American Petroleum Institute, and in January of 2001, he was put by the president in charge of environmental policy. He received a memo from the EPA that warned about global warming, and he edited it. He has no scientific training whatsoever, but he took it upon himself to overrule the scientists. I said, I want to see what this guy's handwriting looks like. This is the memo from the EPA. These are his actual pen strokes. He says, no, you can't say this. This is just speculation. This was embarrassing to the White House, so this fellow resigned a few days later, and the day after he resigned, he went to work for ExxonMobil.
Again, we see Al Gore pinpointing the enemy and connecting the oil companies to skepticism on the issue and destroying any middle ground, creating a clear good and evil between the two. He's also sending a message that even skepticism at the highest levels from the White House can be doctored information and thus cannot be trusted, creating a defense for his thesis. One last tool of propaganda that I would like to highlight is the tool of assertion. It's an enthusiastic or impassioned statement presented as fact, although it might not necessarily be true. One key point of contention in Al Gore's film is the use of Michael Mann's hockey stick graph, which you can see Al Gore starting to lay out here in the film. The graph shows consistent rising and falling of temperature and CO2 over several 100,000 years, but then shows an irregular spike in our modern times in recent decades. Here's what Al Gore has to say about it.
Never gone above 300 parts per million. Here is where CO2 is now. Way above where it's ever been as far back as this record will measure.
However, the National Academy of Sciences, in a review of data released by the U.S. Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works in the same year, stated that the hockey stick graph was broken and it did not adequately account for the medieval warming period or the Little Ice Age, something which Al Gore tries to downplay in his presentation of the facts.
Now, I show this for a couple of reasons. Number one, the so-called skeptics will sometimes say, oh, this whole thing, this is a cyclical phenomenon. There was a medieval warming period after all. Well, yeah, there was. There it is right there. There are two others. But compared to what's going on now, there's just no comparison. So if you...
However, Gore would be aware of a paper that was published in 2003 by Willie Soon and Sally Balunis of the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, which concluded that 20th century temperatures could not confidently be considered to be warmer than those indicated at the beginning of the last millennium. The study was based on meta-analysis of dozens of paleoclimate studies that extended back 1,000 years. Even recently, their research would be reaffirmed in several op-ed pieces in the Wall Street Journal, as well as some information from an unlikely source. Professor Phil Jones, who recently had to resign his position at East Anglia University over his involvement in academic fraud in the ClimateGate scandal, recently did a Q&A with the BBC. In it, he provided data from 1860 to 2009 and admitted that the warming rates for all four periods were similar and not statistically significantly different from each other. In fact, the BBC point-blank asks him, does he agree that from 1995 to the present there has been no statistically significant global warming? He essentially answered, yes.
First, isn't there a disagreement among scientists about whether the problem is real or not? Actually, not really. There was a massive study of every scientific article in a peer-reviewed journal written on global warming for the last 10 years. And they took a big sample of 10%, 928 articles. And you know the number of those that disagreed with the scientific consensus that we're causing global warming and that it's a serious problem? Out of the 928, 0.
This is a vital point in the film where Al Gore establishes an absolute consensus on global warming, which is man-made by carbon emissions. However, upon closer examination, we find another half-truth presented as a whole fact. To reach this conclusion, a search was done in the ISI Web of Knowledge database from years 93 to 2003 under keywords global climate change. They read 928 article summaries or abstracts and determined from only that information a general consensus among all the articles. However, a British scientist by the name of Benny Pizer checked the procedure and found that only 913 of those articles had abstracts or summaries at all, and only 13 of those remaining 913 explicitly endorsed the so-called consensus view. In fact, several actually opposed it, according to Richard S. Lindzen from MIT, who wrote an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal in June of 2006. As you start to look deeper into an inconvenient truth, some inconvenient questions start to come up. Clearly, there is more to the story than Al Gore is sharing with his viewers. And perhaps, much like blind religious faith, Gore believes in his heart that his thesis is true and we are in imminent danger, regardless of any true scientific objectivity or honest debate of the data and facts. However, it is not the intention of this documentary to ascertain any absolute truth or falsity on the matter. The world is far more complex than any black and white truth that we would try to fit it into. But what I do want to convey to you is that Al Gore does have an agenda, and he is using propaganda. At the very least, we can say the debate is not over, and there is still no consensus on anthropogenic global warming. But you wouldn't know it by watching Al Gore's film.